Content warning, suicide, and nihilism.
Hide.
You left.
Hello, my children. Welcome to the Green Lodge. And what do we have here? Another reality-bending house? A malevolent entity? Ooh, tell me more. Tonight's fare is a bit more cerebral, with a touch of crippling terror. Care to take it away, Mr. Hurd? Yes, thank you, Mr. Cash. Has a movie ever snuck up on you, speaking straight to your core? The Night House completely bowled me over, not only for the concept sown throughout its runtime, but for the absolutely chilling horror that managed to throw me off balance, even though there's arguably no gore or deaths in the actual film. It was released in 2021 by David Bruckner, otherwise known as the dude who did Netflix's Ritual, created VHS's Siren short that then spun off into its own film, and did the most brutal segment of Southbound, The Accident. Oh, and he's recently released the newest Hellraiser film. You know, the one that got snatched up by Hulu and features a trans femme hell priest that made the internet lose its collective mind for a minute? By the way, it's fucking excellent. I'll definitely need to do another draft on my Hellraiser retrospective, especially since the new one rocks so hard. Anyway, before we get into it, I wanted to thank my patrons, Chris Markinson, Stormy OK, Bryce Cleek, Catherine C., and Larry Korowitz. Thank you as always for the support. Now let's jump into it. My name is Justin D. Hurd, and I'm all sewn up. Are you ready to go? The Night House snuck up on me. I'm honestly not even quite sure when it was announced, but I've been so eagerly hyped for David Bruckner to release the new Hellraiser that apparently I just put blinders on. When the trailer finally hit, I was completely shocked. I had no idea it was coming, and it just so happened to be done by one of my favorite new filmmakers. Not only that, but both films were written by the same screenwriters that were doing the reimagined Hellraiser, and somehow I managed to completely miss that this movie existed. While I had watched the trailer, for some reason it had flittered out of my mind in the months it took for the film to come out. I managed to see the film in theaters twice and was completely won over by its presentation. It's a terrifying look into someone self-destructing in slow motion, while the few people in her life continue to fail her, all with a decidedly supernatural edge to the whole thing. For those that haven't seen the film, I'm going to be diving into its craziness and what the actual story is about, so needless to say, spoilers. I absolutely recommend you check the movie out before you jump into this video essay, but for those that are ready for the deep dive, here we go. Part 1, the story as it is. So, I've got my own way of pitching the Night House to people, but it's probably best to hear it straight from the director, David Bruckner.
On its surface, it is a story about a recent widow who begins to dig into the unexpected death of her husband and uncover his dark secrets.
Ooh.
So, when I do this, I also throw in references to What Lies Beneath, Dragonflight, and White Noise for the type of horror this leans into. I mean, when I say this is my favorite horror movie of 2021, people expect for it to be a lot more grotesque than it actually is. So, Beth is a recently widowed teacher. During the last week of school, Beth's husband Owen took their boat onto the lake and blew his brains out with a gun she didn't even know they had. He left behind a note that said, "You were right. There is nothing. Nothing is after you. You're safe now." This is all revealed to us in Beth's weaker moments, spilling out at the most inappropriate times, but we really can't blame her for that. She's grieving and the world is testing her. From her gossipy coworkers to the random Karen mother who ambushes Beth in order to get her kid a better grade.
I apologize.
Oh, you want an A. All right. Ta-da!
A B is fine.
B it is.
All the while, Beth is left alone in the house, caught in a loop of drinking brandy and watching home videos. Owen had learned how to build the house at the same time they had hired contractors to do the work. In the videos of their life back when they were happy, it's addressed like it's an endearing quirk of Owen's that he has to do everything himself. Pissed and needing to do something with herself, Beth begins tossing out Owen's things. In his office, she goes through his books, stumbling upon a weird sketchbook that she had given him that not only has architectural drawings, but seems to be mirrored, with cryptic notes throughout like, "Trick it, don't listen to it," and plenty of maze-like structures, along with the phrase Kerdroya. Beth, drunk and unsure of what she's seeing, just tosses the sketchbook back into the box and moves on. We will never see this book again. Beth is plagued by sleepless nights that blend into nightmares, so much so she's not sure what is real and what isn't. Their wedding song shows up multiple times throughout the film, each in its own diegetic way, and it becomes a way for the presence in her house to communicate during those fever dreams. It's on one of these nights that the stereo turns on, playing Richard Thompson's Calvary Cross, and Beth gets multiple texts from Owen's phone telling her not to be scared and to come downstairs. She finally calls it, and hears a crackly voice telling her to look out the window, only for her to see Owen standing naked on the water. He turns to look at her over his shoulder, and she jerks awake from sleeping on the floor. In an effort to verify what happened last night, she checks her phone to find no texts. She then goes out to her car and opens the evidence box to find both his phone and the gun he had killed himself with, still locked in its evidence bag. When she goes through his messages, she finds no evidence that her nightmare was real. However, she trips over a candid photo that she at first jumps past, thinking it was of her, then goes back and begins to suspect that it might not be. Even her best friend Claire, played by Sarah Goldberg from HBO's Barry.
But then, to be honest, of course I'm so happy for you. Of course I want you to get this part, and I want to be the one to help you learn your lines and fix your inflections, but I need you to know that if you do get it, it's gonna make me like 100 times more insane. Okay? Continue.
Hey, Ike, you shitbird. You want a little pie?
Claire immediately thinks that it's her, but when Beth pushes back against that, Claire cautions her that nothing good will come from digging into Owen's life now that he's dead. Claire invites Beth out to the bar with some of their co-workers, where Beth is too drunk to care about talking about the suicide, and her co-workers are uncouth enough to keep pressing her for intimate details that obviously are not great for her to be delving into, yet she persists. She even brings out the suicide note we've already talked about, stating that she has no idea what he was referring to. Later, when alone with Claire in the house, she reveals quite awkwardly that she does know what he was talking about. When Beth was a teenager, she was in a car wreck that crushed her chest and killed her. For 4 minutes, she was dead.
Heart stopped. Whole deal.
When people asked her what it was like, she would lie and say she couldn't remember.
But I remember.
It was nothing, just a tunnel, no light at the end of it. I love the contradiction in Beth's interpretation. She says there's nothing, like no consciousness, just black. However, she then relates it to the old light at the end of the tunnel, and that there's just tunnel. So there is something there, but nowhere to go, or is she just speaking about tunnel vision where the darkness encroaches on your sight? I do love the way she picks apart the lines as she recites the note with that 1,000-yard stare.
You were right. There is nothing. Nothing is after you. You're safe now.
Speaking of which, you gotta admit it would be pretty soul-crushing to be in her headspace right now. She was so sure there was nothing when you died that she is terrified she infected Owen with her depression. He even says in the note that she was right, but now that he's dead, she's been experiencing weird, seemingly supernatural occurrences, potentially proving that she was wrong after all, and it cost her her husband. She's not exactly wrong either. Anyway, this segment features one of my favorite shots of the film, where we slowly move on to the drunk and exhausted Beth as she lays her head in Claire's lap. While stroking her hair, Claire offers to stay, but Beth refuses, asking only for her to stay until she falls asleep. In this one shot, we watch as she nods off, only only to be awoken by a deluge of sound alone in her house. She hears a whisper, then runs outside to shout,
You want to say something? Talk to me!
As she searches outside, I absolutely love the way the shadows change Rebecca Hall's face to the point that she is barely recognizable at times. Here, she comes across several girls running to the ledge that overlooks the lake and just yeeting themselves into the abyss. While Beth goes to check the water and finds nothing, she does spot a house on the other side of the lake. Here is where we get a better idea of what Owen might have been up to. Throughout, we've been hearing Owen warning Beth both for and against certain actions. She's led down to the dock, a location where she's already had a couple weird occurrences during her waking hours. Waiting for her down there is the boat Owen killed himself in. She refuses to get on it once she sees the bloody aftermath of Owen's suicide. Here is one of the creepiest, tensest scenes I can think of. She once again finds footprints, bloody this time, and asks Owen to show her he's there, and oh God. She is swept up by his presence and is placed, half-conscious, on the boat and transported across an all-encompassing ocean with twin moons in the sky, one with its traditional white light, the other blood red. When she lands on that distant shore, she arrives at the inverted version of her house. She gets the warning, but completely ignores it as she witnesses Owen with multiple women who look eerily like her. There are indications that he's in relationships with each of them, appearing in different parts of their inverted house, and he seems infuriated and frustrated in every iteration. Beth rushes in the front door, only to see herself asleep on the couch, who startles awake, only to find the front door swinging open in the same way she had just been standing there. Beth pulls Owen's laptop out of one of the boxes in his office and searches up the photo of the mystery woman that is probably not Beth, and finds a duplicate in some hidden folders. While I'm not sure who would store their photos in this manner, there she finds pictures of multiple women, several she recognizes from the dream she had last night. We then cut to her outside wandering the woods where she had seen the inverted house. She runs into her neighbor Mel, and they have a brief conversation about the house across the lake. He reveals that this is all protected woods, so no one can build out there. When she tries to excuse herself, Mel steps up to the plate and notes that she's not well and he's worried about her. While I do like the fumbling everyone seems to do when addressing her trauma, honestly at this point Beth seems a bit distraught, but not entirely unwell. She is nowhere near the absolute wreck of a human being she is in 2022's Resurrection. It's one of the few things I think could have been improved upon in this film. Somehow, against all odds, she finds a marked path that leads directly to a scaled-down version of her house in the middle of the woods. It's been here a while, exposed to the elements as it is, but there's no mistaking that this is the inverted house she saw the night before. While exploring this shell of a house, she finds this unique creation. At this point, I don't think I need to remind you that Bruckner's follow-up to this was Hellraiser. Beth immediately goes to Mel's house and forces herself inside. She pushes Mel to tell the truth, and he reveals that while he has no idea about the house up there, he had caught Owen up there at some point with another woman, one that looked so much like Beth that he thought it was her and called out to the two of them. That night, Owen showed up at his house drunk and covered in mud, and said that he had
shameful urges that he was rightfully ashamed of, that he was trying to shake.
I absolutely love Mel's response to Beth's next question.
What kind of urges?
You'll forgive me if I didn't feel the need to ask.
She goes back through the boxes and is unable to find the sketchbook that perplexed her so. She does manage to find a Caradroya book, along with another one stamped with the bookstore they came from. In frustration, she knocks the voodoo sculpture off the counter. The house begins to creak and moan. Beth investigates because she's a white person in a horror movie.
Nope.
And enters what seems to be a storage area for them, including this weirdly strategically placed column that has some very interesting molding. Oh well, probably doesn't mean anything. Unless... Beth rushes forward, calling for him to come back in frustration when the silhouette breaks apart. She goes to the bookstore and has to deal with a stereotypically unhelpful clerk, but she notices the girl from the picture that started this whole journey and approaches her. A little aside here. For some reason, a lot of the reception to this film has an edge of confusion to it, like they tend to read the film as only a metaphor for grief, like the Babadook. But to me, there's too much textual evidence that all this is happening for me to ascribe to it being all in Beth's head. Like, up to this point, she's had several nightmares that have echoes in real life, including leading her to things she had no idea existed. The dream of the house not only led to pictures of actual women, but also the hollowed-out shell of his inverted house. In the dreams, it is perfect and built to exacting specifications, but the actual product is less than that. All he needed to do was create an imitation of it. The dreams did the rest. That being said, this character is one of the few where I can see the film as less literal. I'll get more into it when this character exits the story, but for now, Beth follows Madeline to an aisle as she puts up books in one of the more chaotic bookstores I've seen. Beth initiates conversation and then, in her continued manic state, freaks out Madeline.
Well, because you slept with my husband and I'm asking you nicely.
Though she does comply with Beth's wishes. Beth finds out that Owen had a flirty relationship with Madeline, going out a couple times for drinks, though Madeline insists that she did not sleep with him. Beth discusses the reveal with Claire, though Claire still argues that Beth needs to stop. Beth correctly points out that Owen had a secret life, so fuck his privacy. He was not the man she thought she knew. Claire asks Beth to take a step back, that she can stay at her house as long as she wants to, though Beth refuses. She does, however, say that she's going to pack a bag and move into a motel for a few days. Keep this in mind. That night, Beth is partially packed and drinking once again. She attempts to call out to Owen, asking that he prove he's there, and a few moments later, she hears the same pounding that she had heard that first night. When she runs downstairs, she sees a shape gliding away from the door, only to discover that it was Madeline. Madeline offers that she should have told Beth the truth, but she was kind of freaked out.
Of course.
She tells about a dream where she was Beth and that something was chasing them, however, she woke up before it caught them. Over the course of her story, Madeline reveals that she had been to the inverted house, though she didn't think much of it. While there, Owen had her hold the sculpture and say some words. Then he held her. They started to kiss. And then he started to strangle her. Beth attempts to assume the worst, but Madeline rightfully pushes back that she told him to stop, and he did. He took her home, apologized, and said that he knew what he had to do. He had to end it. While it's obvious in hindsight that he was talking about killing himself, Madeline took it as he clearly felt guilty about cheating on Beth and knew that he had to end their relationship.
That's what he was talking about, right?
Oh, my sweet summer child.
Now for my absolute favorite shot of the movie. Madeline leaves in the rain and climbs in her car. With the way the lighting hits, as well as the trail from the windshield wiper blades, we're left with a clear shot of Madeline's head split open by shadows. She then raises her hand suddenly in a very unnatural way, and wouldn't you know it, her hand looks like it's been ripped open as well, which seems to be a recurring thing in horror right now, appearing in Hellraiser, Men, Halloween Ends. And those are just the ones I saw in 2022. I do want to stop here and say that in the text of the film, Madeline is very much alive and just barely escaped Owen's intentions. However, you could definitely read this as Madeline is a ghost. At the bookshop, Madeline only appears to Beth. Even when Madeline calls out to her coworker, the asshole on the register, no one shows up or reacts. Honestly, her moving through the stacks called to mind the opening of Ghostbusters for some reason. Then we see Madeline again at the house, and she moves so oddly away from the doorway that we are meant to read it as yet another ghostly apparition that Beth is just going to miss. Lastly, we have this shot. No blood, but definitely the intention to show how Madeline would have died if Owen had his way, if she actually survived at all. It's the only part of the story that doesn't have a textual reinforcement, either through dreams or the things that Beth finds in the waking world. Then again, I did reach out to the screenwriters and director through Twitter to see what they thought. Luke Petrowski said, "The house is definitely built to accommodate multiple interpretations." When I mentioned that I looked crazy when I described this theory, David Bruckner responded, "You're not crazy." Look, I'm going to take that as an absolute win. I really wish there was a commentary track for this film to get some more of their unfiltered thoughts, but I gotta go with what I can get.
In my research for this, I found clips where they very much state that Madeline may just not exist at all.
David said to me on set something that freaked me out, but was actually really important, that he's like, "Oh, well, we don't really know if your character is real." I thought, oh, great. This is terrifying to hear.
Anyway, I think I may have gotten ahead of myself there. Drunk out of her mind, Beth crosses the lake and goes to the inverted shell of her house. She calls out to Owen but gets no response. I love the way that she is so done that she's just begging for him to
Just come get me!
It's here that she drops her flashlight, and in her attempt to pick it up, accidentally steps through the floor and finds several decomposing corpses under the floorboards, wrapped in plastic. At this point, she sobers up quick as she rushes home, only for the adrenaline to wear off during her phone call to Claire, which has one of my favorite lines.
I wish that it were morning.
She then wanders away from her still leaving a message phone to take a shower. Another weird aside here. I've read and heard multiple people complaining about how quickly Beth's hair dries between the shower and her leaving it. However, you can clearly see that Beth's head is not being hit directly by the water, and her hair is still damp throughout the sequence. It's pretty obvious, and only appears dry once she wakes up on the couch, which is a reminder that she is now in a different body than she had been the moment before. Also, just for comparison, here's her hair completely dry and frizzy from the first night. I don't know why this particular detail breaks people, but come on. It reminds me so much of what happened with Gretel and Hansel, where people got so hung up on it not being a sequel to Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters that they review bombed the shit out of that movie. Anyway, she hears Calvary Cross again and leaves the shower, only for the song to shut off abruptly, and she correctly calls out for him to stop it. When he doesn't appear, she has a full-on breakdown, finally letting the grief catch up with her, and she completely loses it. Only for this simple message to appear. And this is one of the reasons I love this movie. Every time we start to wonder if this is actually happening, they give us another thing that confirms it. That being said, this is not the reaction I expected. However, this is when the movie definitely takes a turn. She sees footprints and hears the steady drip drip of something, someone, standing there. She calls out to it, but is actually able to touch it this time. The way they achieved this was as weird and experimental as the rest of this movie has been. They used these pressurized tubes that they experimented with until it looked like invisible fingers running along Beth's skin. Rebecca Hall pointed out that a lot of this scene was improvised and just kind of giving yourself over to the process because
Wasn't a guy in a suit green and then they green screened him out afterwards. I was just sort of miming a kind of dance, and I felt that I definitely had to check my embarrassment at the door because I had to be prepared to look really foolish, because you do look really foolish when you're making out with yourself, essentially.
There's a weird body horror element to the way she contorts as she holds the invisible force. It whispers to her, pushes her against the sink in a forceful and sexual way. She calls out to Owen.
No. I'm not Owen.
Oh, shit. She immediately pulls away, only for the door to slam shut. When she turns around, she finds her reflection is now one of the many women Owen had killed. He slams the woman's head against the glass, shattering it, only to seemingly look through time and space directly at Beth. She tries to leave and is seized by whatever the presence is, only for her head to be slammed into the glass, shattering it in reality and disorienting Beth as she wanders from the bathroom. She realizes she's in the inverted house. This is one of the creepier sequences in the film as the other girls make their presence known and try to hide from him. She watches Owen tie up the dead woman into the voodoo statue's pose. She tries to escape but runs into multiple iterations of Owen with the different women. Wait, is that Madeline? Why would she be here if she's still... Beth follows the sound of the creaking to look down a hallway. The architecture and pictures extend until it creates the silhouette of a man, As the door opens, Beth is grabbed by what seems to be the house coming alive and is dragged through the iterations until she's thrown down the stairs and the madness just stops. There, she finds the most Christmassy scene I've ever come across. She's standing across the room looking at Owen sitting over her with her sleeping head in his lap. Meanwhile, Oh Holy Night is playing creepily in the background. It definitely creates a mood, but who the fuck would celebrate Christmas like this? That being said, this is also a crucial and near perfect scene where Beth finally understands what type of story she's in. Also, this is where everything is explained, though for some reason it confuses people like I touched on earlier. Assuming Owen's form, the actual concept of nothingness talks with Beth. When Beth had died at 17, she had seen him, and he's been pining for her ever since. In an effort to get to her, Nothing latched onto Owen and whispered to kill Beth until he was driven mad. But Owen loved her too much and refused. Instead, he dove into the occult and built the Night House, an inverted maze to trick Nothing, and instead offered him women who looked similar to Beth. This worked multiple times, but not for very long. Owen was able to stop himself from killing Madeline, if we believe she's still alive, and thought that if he killed himself, he would be able to save Beth. But he was too short-sighted. All Owen's suicide did was lead Nothing straight to Beth. And she didn't help herself by calling out to him and digging deeper to and exposing Owen's deception. It's interesting rewatching the film because it shows just how much she's playing with fire and had no idea. I've honestly become really fond of films where the main character thinks they're in a completely different movie, only to realize that they've been playing the game completely wrong.
I'm in danger!
Beth wakes up on the couch, still very much trapped in this reality, and looks up to see through the house at Nothing. She pops up and tries to leave, but he grabs her and twists her body into the voodoo pose. In this formation, she begins to choke and sees the separating moons, almost as if she's having a spiritual revelation. Honestly, it reminded me a lot of Martyrs in this moment, as well as Control. And then she passes out. We cut to the next morning, with Claire pulling up to the house and trying to find Beth. She comes up with nothing until she enters the bathroom and finds the shattered mirror. She begins to run through the house, screaming Beth's name. Even her neighbor Mel hears the yelling and begins to slowly, much too slowly, make his way to Beth's house. Beth awakens, still in the darkness, alone on the boat with Owen. He seals his suicide note, places it lovingly on his clothes, and then prepares to kill himself. Beth asks where Owen is, and Nothing responds.
Gone. But you already knew that.
Finding the voodoo doll and the empty evidence bag where the gun used to be, she runs to the window to find Beth on the lake in the boat that Owen killed himself in. Nothing reveals that Owen thought he could protect her, but he was wrong.
You were right.
And Beth realizes she is holding the gun. Claire calls out to Beth and it manages to break through the trance. And I love this moment.
It doesn't matter. Let go. Come back to me.
Beth nods, gripping the gun tightly as she points it straight toward her head. And then they pull the ripcord for some reason, and Beth is back in the real world and puts down the gun. Clara swim out to the boat and tips Beth into the lake in an attempt to save her. When they get to the pier, Beth says she's back, but stares out at the boat. Mel squints his eyes as if he can see something, but it's just shadows on the water.
There's nothing there.
I know.
Part 2, that ending. Honestly, this has been one of my favorite movies ever, with the exception of the ending. One part of me thinks it should have ended with Beth being contorted into the voodoo pose, then Claire finding nothing in the house, just no sign of her. She had said that she was going to be leaving to rent a motel, but didn't name anything in particular. It could be easily read as her leaving behind her old life and moving on, though we know that nothing had claimed her. You know, the absolute brutal inversion of Good Will Hunting. However, I absolutely love the bleakness of dealing one-on-one with nothing. The whole idea that her friend yelling for her doesn't matter anymore, just let go, is so striking because everything falls away except his voice. It feels like they knew that was too bleak of an ending and instead had her make the decision to live. But it does come off as anticlimactic. Perhaps there's a way to recut it where she fires the gun but misses, like Possessor does at a pivotal moment. Or just cut to black and use the gunfire from earlier.
Beth?
But I think it could still work well if she just woke up stuck in darkness on the boat after passing out and still leave it where Claire comes over at the...
It doesn't matter.
But Claire finds nothing because Beth has gone off with nothing. I'm not really sure what the best move here is, though. Let me know what you think. Part 3, Rebecca Hall. One of the things I absolutely love about Rebecca Hall's performance is how on the edge she is teetering throughout. There's a real bipolar energy to it, as she experiences crushing lows throughout with brief glimpses of a mania that shocks anytime it rears its head. I love how she reacts anytime she gets touched by the presence, like a giddy schoolgirl after her first kiss. She is so down and is pressing further and further into the madness because there is some hope that Owen is still there. In some ways, it reminds me of Lee Winnell's The Invisible Man, except that Beth is absolutely head over heels for Owen, whereas Elizabeth Moss's Cecilia is terrified of Adrian. Hell, there are multiple conversations in both about how enigmatic their partners had been. In The Invisible Man, it was how Adrian controlled her and manipulated everyone around her. In this, we hear from Mel and Madeline about how convincing he was, and Beth is obviously enraptured by him to keep pressing forward, even after finding the bodies. Another aspect of the film is how they use shadows and light to redraw Rebecca Hall's face. There were seriously times while watching this that I couldn't tell whether or not they were actually still using Rebecca Hall or had subbed in another actress, which honestly wouldn't be out of the question because it seemed like they found a great way to use the idea that all these actors and actresses look the same. I was in a relationship previously where my partner couldn't tell the difference between Elijah Wood and Daniel Radcliffe. I personally have issues with both Samara Weaving and Margot Robbie, as well as Bryce Dallas Howard and Jessica Chastain.